Let's talk about your skin. I know that's a weird thing to hear from this podcast, but trust me, you're reading the news, you're probably not sleeping great, you're stressed out all the time. Your skin knows it too. I know mine does. Facial in a Bottle by Love Indus is a single product that does the work of a full professional facial at home in minutes. Clean ingredients, real results, no appointment required. It is vital this time of year, especially when all of us have been cooped up in the house. When we are outside, it's cold and windy. It takes a toll on your skin. And for a lot of us, maybe that spring vacation is just around the corner and warmer days are ahead and you want your face to be ready. Go to loveindus.com and use the code MIMS25 for 21% off your first order. Just use the link in the show notes to get your discount. All right, let's get on with the show. It's Tuesday, February 24th, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Harms. It is State of the Union Day today, the time every year when the president slides down our chimneys by order of the Constitution to tell us how the country is doing, like we haven't been watching it happen for ourselves. A lot of times, these speeches go pretty much as predicted and are frequently on the lower stakes side. But this one, for President Trump, just might be his most high-stakes speech maybe ever. We're going to talk today about why that is, why we are expecting to hear from the president, and what might not be as expected, and what Democrats are doing, because tonight dozens of them aren't even going to be in the room for this speech. Now, before we get to that, make sure that you're following or subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, like I say every week, because this week's Things You Forgot from Civics Class newsletter is all about how the Supreme Court, and in fact, our federal courts actually work, because a lot of times they can seem sort of tucked out of the way until they make huge news, and you're sort of left wondering, well, how does this all work? That is what this week's newsletter is trying to explain at Things You Forgot from Civics Class. That is just for paid subscribers. You can become a paid subscriber for just $5 a month. All right, let's get on with the show. In just a few hours from when I'm recording this, about 5 hours or so, the president will give his first State of the Union address for his second term. Now, he did give a speech last March that was like a State of the Union, but technically isn't one. Presidents have to give a State of the Union. The Constitution spells that out directly. It doesn't have to be once a year. The Constitution only says the president will update Congress on the state of the nation from time to time, but pretty much right away in American history, it became an annual thing. It's meant to be like a shareholder or board meeting at a company where the CEO updates members on how he's been running the company. Now, for Trump, this update might be the most important one in his second term so far, and depending on what happens here, maybe the most important one for him as president, period. Trump is coming into this weaker than any two-term president this century. A new CNN poll done just last week found that Trump's approval rating is 36%. Just over a third of Americans approve of his job as president. You'll probably be hearing this thrown around today, or maybe you've had over the last few days, but his net approval rating is negative 27. But his approval rating hasn't been this low since just after January 6th of 2021, after we saw the insurrection on the Capitol. Now, a few other polls have Trump's approval rating closer to 40%, but not above it, an incredibly low point for it to not even be halfway through this presidency. On top of that, a majority of Americans disapprove of his handling of nearly every single one of his top policies, according to a new Washington Post poll. Half of people said they disapprove of how he's handled the U.S.-Mexico border. 58% said they don't like the job he's done on immigration overall. When it comes to how he's dealt with other countries, including our allies, 62% have disapproved. When it comes to the economy, the top issue for pretty much everyone in America right now, 58% disapprove of his handling of the overall economy, 64% disapprove of the tariffs, and 65% disapprove of his inability to make good on the promise to lower inflation. In the end, just 29% of people say the economy is better since Trump took office. That is a staggeringly low number. Now, one really big caveat to all of this is these are the overall numbers, and they don't really matter to Trump or his administration. They only care about how Republicans feel, and 80% said they still trust Trump more than Democrats to handle the country's biggest problems. But if you're a Republican running for office right now, it doesn't mean that loyalty to Trump extends to you. In fact, a study from 2023 looking at the last midterm elections found that Trump's endorsement or a candidate pledging loyalty to Trump, quote, generally does not produce meaningful increases in actual daily fundraising totals for candidates, either in the short or long term, which fundraising more or less equates to how well a candidate is going to do in that race. And to be fair, endorsements in general don't have a really huge effect on any race, but with people pretty unhappy with the state of things, a Republican in a place where they might be up for re-election in a tough race or even in a race where they could just have a chance to lose, those are not good numbers. And for Trump, this speech is a chance to win back American voters on what he sees as his accomplishments. What those might be, I'll talk about in a second here, because this speech will also be a test of whether Trump looks and acts presidential enough. In that same Washington Post poll, voters said they don't think Trump is a good fit to be president. When they were asked if he was an honest or a good person, just 29% agreed. And that's actually lower than where they were when they were asked last fall. Just 48% of people said he was a strong leader, which is a thing that he's going to care about a lot. And then you get to his health, where 52% said he was not physically healthy enough to do the job, and 57% said he didn't have the mental sharpness it takes to be president. And those concerns have been swirling for months, as pictures of bruising and swelling have made the rounds month after month. He's appeared to slur his words while reading out loud or speaking. He's gone on late night, unhinged, posting rants on social media, sharing AI slop and writing barely coherent screeds that are hundreds of words long. And then, of course, there's the falling asleep in public, the multiple visits to the hospital for MRIs and CT scans, and what appeared to be stroke-like symptoms that were caught on camera back in September at the 9/11 memorial and in Europe just last month. So Trump doesn't just have to convince the American people that he can turn things around policy-wise, but that he's actually the guy that they should have their faith in doing the job. And that is not a position that Trump is going to enjoy being in. One of the main things about how Trump has been president for the last just over a year now is that he is a strong man, authoritarian, authority kind of a figure, and nobody seems to be buying that anymore. And so this speech for him is really going to be a pretty big test of not just his policies, which I'm going to talk about here in a second, but also his entire thing, which is the Trump show of being a strong man president. If that's not working, this speech might be his last chance to get a lot of people back on board, certainly before the midterm elections. Now, one way he's going to try to do that is to speak as long as possible. His speeches during his first term and his most recent joint address to Congress last March were longer and longer, starting at about an hour in 2017 and then going on for an hour and 40 minutes last year. Part of that is Trump loves a spotlight, like I said, the Trump show. But part of that is also making the speech as long as possible to show off stamina and force Democrats into a position to be put up against the evening news, the evening local news, where stations might have to cut off what Democrats are saying in their response to the president's address. Now, it could also just be that Trump is getting older and he rambles off teleprompter more. I think it's probably a coin toss. So what is this thing going to look like? It's not fully clear exactly what he's going to say. It's a little too early right now for any advanced copies of the speech to go out, and this White House might choose just to not do that at all. But last week, the official Trump team sent out texts to people on their lists. I'm one of them, asking what people were most excited to hear Trump talk about, listing off things like border wins and future mass deportation, economic successes and affordability, Trump's new health care plan, and ending fraud and corruption. Now, the important thing to know here is there aren't a lot of wins in any of those areas right now for Trump. You just heard how people feel about things like the economy and immigration, but on healthcare, Trump did roll out a new loose idea for healthcare. It's basically a version of HSAs or their health saving accounts, but there's not actually a plan yet because the Senate can't agree on one. And both of those plans, according to KFF, leave a lot to be desired for a lot of people, including those with pre-existing conditions. And this idea of not having a healthcare plan is a lot of egg on the faces of Republicans and Trump in particular, who has been promising at this point for more than a decade that he would have some kind of plan to repeal and replace Obamacare or the Affordable Care Act. And then there's Trump's new prescription plan, his new Trump RX website, where he promised to strong-arm Big Pharma into giving you lower prices. It turns out it's a little more than a search engine for manufacturer coupons, so not exactly the art of the deal on that one. And then you've got corruption and fraud. And this is where we'll likely hear the president push the Save America Act, the pro-voter ID, anti-mail-in ballot bill the president wants in place before the midterms. I have talked a lot about that on the show already. He'll also likely go through DOGE, which didn't really find any notable fraud or savings, and instead just helped to increase the national debt, not pay it down like Trump and Elon Musk promised. And of course, there's the actual corruption happening in the administration that we can see with our own eyes, like DHS Secretary Kristi Noem buying a $70 million private plane to fly around the country on with her maybe not boyfriend, or giving her press secretary's husband a $250 million contract. The FBI director using the FBI's private jet to go and see the USA men's hockey team in Milan this past weekend, among other trips he's taken on that plane. The president accepting a Boeing 747 from the government of Qatar. And I'm just realizing how much plane-based corruption there has been in the last year, which is weird. Anyway, there's also things around cryptocurrency and the president's family, and of course, what looks like an awful lot of covering up for the president in the Epstein files, including a brand new report out today from NPR that basically says the Department of Justice is covering for the president by removing allegations the president sexually assaulted a minor. That is for a different episode. So not only is Trump going to have to convince people that he is still fit for the overall job, but there's also a lot of other things working against him. And I fully expect to hear him rail against Democrats and maybe the Supreme Court, who just struck down his tariff policies, maybe our allies overseas, as well as our enemies. I also think he's going to say something like they're rooting out woke DEI from the government, that they've targeted trans kids in sports. And I think most of the areas where he's fallen short, he's going to blame Joe Biden. There's also a chance he's going to announce some kind of military action in Iran. The State of the Union isn't usually where those things are done, but who knows, it's his show. And make no mistake, he sees this as a reality TV performance. And when it comes to what the Democrats are doing, that's going to be really interesting on how they counter-program Trump's reality TV. For starters, dozens of Democrats are boycotting the speech altogether. They'll be attending a different rally or several different events around Washington. This is a step up from what they did the last time Trump gave a speech to Congress, where they wore T-shirts with slogans on them or held up protest signs before some of them walked out. And there was even a loud pseudo-planned interruption from Texas Representative Al Green, who was then removed by Speaker Mike Johnson. It's not all Democrats who are boycotting, though. Some of them said they wanted to stay because they thought it was important for Trump to see their faces, like Senator Richard Blumenthal, who said, quote, "I refuse to let him bully me out of the room." Now, none of that is helping Democrats beat the too disorganized to govern allegations, and if anything, it again puts them at odds with their own voters who want unified dissent against the president, and they want something stronger from Democratic leaders who remain among the least popular leaders in Congress in modern history. It's also unclear if these sorts of things are going to work with their voters. People generally don't like disrespect, even if Trump's whole being is about disrespect. Public shows of disrespect are the kind of thing that most people tend to recoil from. It's also unclear if these sorts of things are going to work with voters, whether it's standing up to Trump to his face or whether it's boycotting, because people generally don't like disrespect. Even if Trump's whole being is about disrespect, public shows of that are a thing that most people tend to recoil from, which is kind of why the pick to respond to the State of the Union is really important for Democrats this time around. And if you don't know, the party not in the White House will have someone give a response to the State of the Union. Sometimes it's a senator or a governor. This time, it's the brand new governor of Virginia, Abigail Spanberger. Now, Spanberger is a moderate to centrist Democrat who won the race for governor in Virginia to become the first female governor of that state. It basically makes her the Democrat in Trump's backyard. She was a former CIA officer, a congresswoman, and she won her race by double digits, mostly on a message of affordability, which kind of tells you where the Democratic Party looks like they're heading for the midterms. More on that later. Now, she was picked by the Democratic leadership, which could easily get under the skin of some Democrats who want a harder line from the party and feel like the party is out of touch. I mean, over the summer, when Democrats were asked about how they saw their own party, just 1 in 10 described it as empathetic to their needs, and just 2 in 10 had something positive to say about, again, their own party. So not only will Spanberger be attempting to convince the broader American public that what Trump had just said is bad, but that what Democrats want is better, and she's going to have to convince her own side of that too. I do not envy her in this job. And the response to the State of the Union is also a notoriously difficult speech to give. It's coming off a normally tightly written, rehearsed, and choreographed speech with lots of applause lines, and not to mention the weight of the office of the president inside the Capitol building all coming together at once. The response is always in like a diner or a cafeteria or a school, and it's awkwardly quiet, and usually the person giving the speech is a quote-unquote rising star, but they're never quite ready for prime time in the way that they think they are. And the response has this sort of curse on it too. It tends to kill the hopes of becoming president for whoever does this speech, because there's always some sort of weird moment, like Marco Rubio's water drinking or Senator Katie Britt's weird Stepford wife delivery. There are more of those, but it is always a little odd. Now, no matter what happens tonight, it is the biggest night of the year for politics outside of election night, because both sides are going to make a new pitch to the American people, which makes it worth watching, which I know is going to be kind of a hard sell, because so many of us have heard the president say the same thing over and over, and I think a lot of people are kind of tired of that broken record, whether or not you agree with the president. And I think the same thing will go for the message that we're going to hear from Democrats, although I, as somebody who is a junkie for these kinds of things, think that what the Democrats are going to say is going to be a little more interesting, and we'll get to see why they picked Abigail Spanberger instead of somebody like Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, who was giving another response speech at a different rally later tonight. I think that's a good place to call it for today's episode. Please rate or review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, and follow along on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word, on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Herms on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you on Thursday.